Hey there. So in this episode, I want to talk to you about empathy and the narcissist. Now, that's not often two words that we bring together when we talk about the narcissist, because if you look in the DSM, which is the Diagnostical and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, so this is what sort of psychiatrists will use to diagnose a narcissist. On there, of the 9 traits, it talks about that lack of empathy. Now, one of the ways that I approach narcissistic abuse and narcissism is through that trauma-informed lens. So it's not necessarily about trying to pathologize everything and give labels for everything. Understandably, I know labels can obviously help. But for me, again, narcissism isn't just about 9 traits that are listed in the DSM, although obviously we have another element of all of that coming through. But it's about a lot of behavior traits. And one of those behavior traits is that lack of empathy, or indeed no empathy. But I want to talk to you about something that, again, I get lots of messages about from within my community, and that is, but they show some empathy. They do look like they care on occasion. And this is where I want to really explain to you a little bit more about what empathy is, because I think that understanding will then help you understand why a narcissist does that. Now, there are actually 3 different types of empathy. We have cognitive empathy, we have emotional empathy, and compassionate empathy. Now, if you think about our brain also has 3 main areas. So we have our brain stem, or our reptilian part of our brain, the mammalian part, which is our limbic system, the emotional part of our brain, and then we have our prefrontal cortex, that logical thinking part of our brain. And over evolution, it's the sort of brain stem that came first, then the limbic system, and then we have that prefrontal cortex, if you think about it like that. And empathy is the same. We can almost put those 3 different types of empathy almost in those 3 different areas of the brain. So the compassionate empathy is really where that brainstem is. It's really that visceral feeling element of the empathy aspect. Then we have the emotional empathy. That is our emotions in that limbic system, where we really feel that about somebody else and we can really empathize with them. And then we have the really interesting one here when we talk about narcissists, and that is the cognitive empathy. So remember, cognitive means front part of the brain, prefrontal cortex, logical, rational part. So it means there we are really conscious about what we are thinking. So if you think about the narcissist then, and if they portray empathy towards either yourself or indeed anybody else, is that actually compassionate or emotional empathy? Are they really feeling that? Are they feeling the emotion involved in that empathy? And the answer is no, they're not. They're not capable of that. It's not that they're choosing not to. It's not that they're making a conscious decision to do that. They just don't feel that. And again, if you've watched some of my other videos or listened to my podcasts around all of this, that pathologizing sometimes doesn't help people when we do talk about things like empathy. So the cognitive empathy is very much around, I'm going to think I'm showing empathy because that's how I should act in this situation. And the narcissist takes it even one step further in that they will fake the empathy in order to get their narcissistic supply. Because remember, narcissistic supply is the drug of choice for the narcissist. So let me give you an example. So, and this was a genuine example for me, so I can talk from experience. So when I was with my ex-husband, we'd got our 2 children. They were very, very young at the time. And my ex-husband used to work away from home a lot. He worked for an airline. And I remember on this particular occasion, I felt really poorly. Now, for me to even ask my husband to stay at home, believe me, anyone who knows me, I'd have needed to be on my deathbed to do that, because it was something I just didn't do, because at the time, you will know from being with a narcissist, we're coming from a place of not feeling good enough anyway. So I'm not showing that I'm weak or anything else. I'm going to power through all of that. So I'd actually asked my husband and said, listen, I don't feel well. I really don't think I'm going to be able to look after the children, because he was going away for about 5 days. And I remember asking him, expecting him hoping that he would say, don't worry, darling, I will call up the airline. And bear in mind, to call in sick to this particular airline, you literally just call up, you give your staff number, and then they say, okay, call back when you're fit and well again. It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't that he was in this small office and him not being there was going to cause chaos within the company. You know, there are always contingency plans for all of this. So I felt like probably for a good 30, 45 minutes, I felt like I was almost begging. And I remember at one stage, I remember sitting on my living room floor, literally tears running down my face, thinking, how am I going to cope? Now, bear in mind, my mum had passed away a year previously as well. So I didn't have that support network when my husband was away. So for me, it was a real genuine fear of, I've got 2 small children here. How am I going to be able to look after them? So I remember literally sitting on that lounge floor. And I remember, as I look back now, it was almost like he was looking at me watching paint dry. It really genuinely felt that there was no empathy. There was no compassion. There was no understanding around the emotion of what I was saying to him. Now, in the end, he did actually call up. But again, it wasn't just a case of calling up to say he was poorly. It was, my son's on life support. So even that had to be extreme to get the supply even off on the call operator to say, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry to hear all of that. I hope everything is okay. So even making that phone call, there had to be something on top of that to get some supply as well. Now, the difference then being is when my father came round a couple of days later and I was really, really poorly, the difference in how my husband was with my father around to it just being me and him was like chalk and cheese. The cognitive empathy then completely kicked in. He was looking after me and he was showing that he was this caring, loving, compassionate husband. Because of course, then my father would be like, oh, isn't he good? He's looking after you. And of course, this was the supply that my husband was looking for. The empathy side of showing that empathy in that moment was not coming from a place of compassion or emotion. It was coming from a place of rationality and logic to gain supply back. And that is the difference. You may have found yourself in situations with the narcissist where it does look like from the outside that they are showing empathy, but they're not showing compassionate or emotional empathy. What they're showing is cognitive empathy, front part of the brain. Very much, I need to show empathy here to get what I need back. That is the narcissist's intention, always the narcissist's intention. The intention to, I'm going to behave like this to get something back, get that supply back, because remember, the narcissist has a really core inner wound of feeling worthless. So everything is about not activating that core wound of their younger wounded part of not feeling worthy, not feeling lovable, not feeling good enough. Equally the same, obviously, of people like you and I, those that have been victimized by a narcissist, but the dynamic is very, very different. We are capable of cognitive, emotional, and compassionate empathy too. So the understanding is when we're talking about empathy, it's not that a narcissist can't show empathy, but they will only show that if they get something in return, their narcissistic supply. So it's very calculating, it's very manipulative. And it's not even conscious necessarily for the narcissist, because it's the system driving to ensure that whatever situation that they are in, nothing aggravates that core inner wound of feeling worthless. So when it was just me and my husband, it was almost, oh, okay, if I stay here, that means I don't go to work where I get lots more supply from other people by saying I do so much at home and what a great father I am. So there was that battle going on within his system. However, at some stage, it tipped in the balance of, okay, actually, she's probably really serious here. You know, there are children involved. Okay, I'll stay at home. So if I'm staying at home, how do I get my supply elsewhere then? Well, when I call up And obviously when my dad came round, and probably to his friends and everybody else, then, I handed him a gift. So when he went back to work, obviously he could say all of that. But just look at the behavior through all of that as an example. The fact that I felt like when it was just me and him, no audience, no nothing, it was like he was watching paint dry. Put an audience there, their behavior changes. So this is one of the key examples that I talk about when we talk about narcissism. When people say to me, is my mother, is my father, is my partner, friend, co-worker, are they a narcissist? Because it looks like they care. And I always say, okay, does it look like they care when they're on their own with you, only you? What about if you put an audience there? For me, they are normally poles apart when we are talking about a narcissist, because they will behave very differently just with you behind closed doors than if there is an audience there, which is why it makes it so difficult. Because of course, to other people then it's like, well, they seem really, really nice. They seem like a really, really nice person. But of course, behind closed doors to you, it's really triggering your feelings of not being good enough. Because of course, certainly for me, sitting on that lounge floor with tears running down my face, feeling like I'm almost begging for him to stay, it really triggered my feelings of not being worthy. Because in my brain, it was like, well, if I was worthy or lovable or good enough, he would say immediately, of course, I'll stay at home. But that was because, again, I was coming from a place of being really, really in my deep inner wounds with all of that and being activated. Of course, if that happened to me now, it would be a very, very different story, because I've obviously done a huge amount of inner work, and this is the work I do now as that trauma-informed therapist and coach. So I help people, obviously, then heal those inner wounds of not feeling worthy or good enough. So if they ever found themselves in that situation again, it's not going to trigger their wounds. They're going to know their starting point always is that they are good enough. So remember, 3 different types of empathy. Cognitive goes hand in hand with that prefrontal cortex. Logical, rational. How am I going to show my empathy to get something back? That's the narcissist drive. That's the narcissist intention. And then we have these 2 other, the emotional part, which is in our limbic system, and the compassionate part, which is in our brainstem, that reptilian part of our brain, that really visceral feeling within our body around the empathy. Narcissists can't feel that. They're just literally driven by the cognitive empathy. And we don't really talk about much like this, do we? We see the word empathy and we lump it all together. But I'm really hoping that by me breaking it down for you, it takes away some maybe guilt or shame or maybe lack of knowledge as to why the narcissist is behaving like this, and leaving you questioning, well, are they a narcissist or not a narcissist? And I hope my example really, really helps give you some clarity around all of this as well. So I hope you enjoyed that. Remember, 3 different types. Think about if you were sat on the living room floor like I was, how would they behave with you on your own and with you and them and an audience? Because if it's different, then there's something going on, and that's going to bring your awareness, and let's explore all of that as well. So take care till the next time. And I really hope you enjoyed this episode.